Mr. President, thank you for joining us. This economic crisis has been so severe that it has literally pushed all the other issues off the television, out of the newspapers. But when you outlined your program for Afghanistan and the new strategy, it really underlined in the starkest terms that we may not be talking about these serious issues, but there's some very serious things going on out there. So I'd like to start there,
please,
if I could. This is a hugely ambitious plan. 22,000 more troops. You're going to increase spending by 60%. You said in your announcement, we must defeat al-Qaeda.
Right.
This has really now become your war, hasn't it?
I think it's America's war. And it's the same war that we initiated after 9/11 as a consequence of those attacks on 3,000 Americans who were just going about their daily round. The focus over the last 7 years, I think, has been lost. What we want to do is to refocus attention on al-Qaeda. We are going to root out their networks, their bases. We are going to make sure that they cannot attack U.S. citizens, U.S. soil, U.S. interests, and our allies' interests around the world. In order for us to do that, we have to ensure that neither Afghanistan nor Pakistan can serve as a safe haven for al-Qaeda. And unfortunately, over the last several years, what we've seen is essentially al-Qaeda moving several miles from Afghanistan to Pakistan, but effectively still able to project their violence and hateful ideologies out into the world.
You talked many times during your, as you outlined this strategy, about al-Qaeda in Pakistan.
Right.
You talked about safe havens in Pakistan.
Right.
Are you giving our commanders now in Afghanistan the green light to go after these people, even if they're in what used to be safe havens in Pakistan?
Well, I haven't changed my approach. If we have a high-value target within our sights, after consulting with Pakistan, we're going after them. But our main thrust has to be to help Pakistan defeat these extremists. Now, one of the concerns that we've had building up over the last several years is a notion, I think, among the average Pakistani that this is somehow America's war and that they are not invested. And that attitude, I think, has led to a steady creep of extremism in Pakistan that is the greatest threat to the stability of the Pakistan government and ultimately the greatest threat to the Pakistani people. What we want to do is say to the Pakistani people, you are our friends, you are our allies. We are going to give you the tools to defeat al-Qaeda and to root out these safe havens, but we also expect some accountability. And we expect that you understand the severity and the nature of the threat. In addition, what we want to do is to help Pakistan grow its economy, to be able to provide basic services to its people. And that, I think, will help strengthen those efforts. If the Pakistan government doesn't have credibility, if they are weakened, then it's going to be much more difficult for them to deal with the extremism within their borders.
But you're talking about going after them. Are you talking about with American boots on the ground, pursuing these people into these so-called safe havens?
No, our plan does not change the recognition of Pakistan as a sovereign government. We need to work with them and through them to deal with al-Qaeda, but we have to hold them much more accountable. And we have to recognize that part of our task in working with Pakistan is not just military. It's also our capacity to build their capacity through civilian interventions, through development, through aid assistance. And that's part of what you're seeing both in Afghanistan and Pakistan, I think, is fully resourcing a comprehensive strategy that doesn't just rely on bullets or bombs, but also relies on agricultural specialists, on doctors, on engineers to help create an environment in which people recognize that they have much more at stake in partnering with us and the international community than giving into some of these
Help me out here,
extremist
though.
ideologies.
How do you, what if they can't do it? What if they won't do it? I mean, we have reports now about members of Pakistan's intelligence service actually actively helping the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
Well,
what if they don't do it?
Some of those reports aren't new. There are a whole host of contingencies that we've got to deal with. I mean, this is going to be hard, Bob. I'm under no illusions. If it was easy, it would have already been completed. And so we're going to have to go with a strategy that is focused, that is narrowly targeted on defeating Al-Qaeda. We think that if you combine military, civilian, diplomatic, development approaches, if we are doing a much better job of coordinating with our allies, that we can be successful. But we recognize there are going to be a lot of hurdles between now and us finally having weakened Al-Qaeda or destroyed Al-Qaeda to the point that it doesn't pose a danger to us. And we will continue to monitor and adjust our strategies to make sure that we're not just going down blind alleys.
Are you concerned at all? Because some people say the more troops you put in, it's just going to inflame the situation. It's going to make it worse. Yes. What do you say to them?
Well, I'm very mindful of that. Look, I'm enough of a student of history to know that the United States in Vietnam and other countries and other epochs of history have overextended to the point where they were severely weakened. And the history in Afghanistan obviously shows that that country has not been very favorably disposed towards foreign intervention. And that's why a central part of our strategy is to train the Afghan National Army so that they are taking the lead increasingly to deal with extremists in their area. That's been one of the few success stories that we've seen over the last several years, is the Afghan National Army actually has great credibility. They're effective fighters. We need to grow that, and that's part of the reason why we want to make sure that there are trainers there. But the last point I would make, a request was made for increased troop levels in Afghanistan. I have already authorized 17,000. We're now adding 4,000 trainers specifically designed to train Afghan security forces. But what I've also said to the Department of Defense and what I will say to the American public is that we now have resourced properly this strategy. It's not going to be an open-ended commitment of infinite resources. We've just got to make sure that we are focused on achieving what we need to achieve with the resources we have. What you seem to be saying is we have to win. There's no choice here. Mm-hmm. So does that mean if more is needed, if the commanders come back to you and say, we may need more troops, Mr. President, to do this, you're going to be ready to do that? What I will not do is to simply assume that more troops always results in an improved situation. I think there was a good argument after us scrubbing this very hard and talking to a lot of our allies in the region, including the Pakistan, Afghanistan governments, the Europeans, and our other NATO allies, that this was the best strategy. But just because we needed to ramp up from the greatly under-resourced levels that we had doesn't automatically mean that if this strategy doesn't work, that what's needed is even more troops. There may be a point of diminishing returns in terms of troop levels. We've got to also make sure that our civilian efforts, our diplomatic efforts, and our development efforts are just as robustly encouraged. And so, for example, in the budget that I've presented to Congress, I've said we've got to increase foreign aid in Afghanistan, and we've got to increase foreign aid in Pakistan, and I'm going to be really pushing Congress, because sometimes foreign aid is a juicy target, particularly during tough times. I'm going to tell them this is central to our strategy, and it can save lives and troops if we properly execute it.
But you described this in very dire terms. I mean, and there's no question that things are worse than ever in Afghanistan. You would agree with that?
I do.
But you're saying...
Well, let me make sure I'm clear. They're not worse than they were when the Taliban was in charge.
Yes.
And Al-Qaeda was operating with impunity. We have seen a deterioration over the last several years, and unless we get a handle on it now, we're going to be in trouble.
You said the other day in the 60 Minutes interview that you would not have thought at this point in your presidency that Iraq would be the least of your worries, something to that effect.
Right.
Are things going well enough there now that you may consider speeding up the withdrawal of troops from Iraq?
No, I think the plan that we put forward in Iraq is the right one, which is let's have a very gradual withdrawal schedule through the national elections in Iraq. There's still work to be done on the political side to resolve differences between the various sectarian groups around issues like oil, around issues like provincial elections. And so we're going to continue to make progress on that front. I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction. But Iraq is not yet completed. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of training of Iraqi forces to improve their capacity. I'm confident, though, that we're moving in the right direction.
Let me ask you about something closer to home, and that is Mexico. You talked about sending more aid to the Mexican government, but things down there are really serious, as you well know. It's my understanding that 90% of the guns that they're getting down in Mexico are coming from the United States. We don't seem to be doing a very good job of cutting off the gun flow. Do you need any kind of legislative help on that front? Have you, for example, thought about asking Congress to reinstate the ban on assault weapons?
No, I think the main thing we need is better enforcement. And so this week we put forward a comprehensive initiative to assist those border regions that are being threatened by these drug cartels, to provide assistance to the Mexican government to make sure that on our side of the border, we've got more personnel, more surveillance equipment.
Well, why are we having so much trouble with that? I mean,
well, what's happened is that President Calderon, I think, has been very bold and rightly has decided that it's gotten carried away, that the drug cartels have too much power, are undermining and corrupting huge segments of Mexican society. And so he has taken them on in the same way that when Elliot Ness took on Al Capone back during Prohibition, oftentimes that causes even more violence, and we're seeing that flare up.
do you think it's a threat to the United States security?
I don't think that it is what would be called an existential threat, but it is a serious threat to those border communities, and it's gotten out of hand. And so what we have to do is to recognize that, look, this is a two-way street.
Would you?
As Secretary Clinton indicated,
Yes.
We've got to reduce demand for drugs. We've got to do our part in reducing the flow of cash and guns south.
Are we anywhere close to putting U.S. troops on the border?
Obviously there have been calls to increase National Guard troops on the borders. That's something that we are considering, but we want to first see whether some of the steps that we've taken can help quell some of the violence, and we want to make sure that we are consulting as effectively as we can with the Mexican government in moving this strategy forward.